My sister and her husband went on a cruise, leaving me to babysit her 8-year-old daughter, who was born mute. When the door shut, she said in a perfect voice, "Auntie, don't drink the tea Mom made. She plotted something bad." My blood ran cold. To understand the sheer horror of that moment, you need to see the cage before the lock clicked. It started 6 hours earlier in a house that looked like a magazine cover, smelling of lavender, expensive polish, and lies. I arrived at noon to find Brooke fluttering around the foyer like a hummingbird on caffeine. Everything was aggressively perfect. The luggage by the door was designer. The floors gleamed enough to see your own insecurities. And my sister was wearing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She hugged me, which was rare. Brooke wasn't a hugger. She was a CEO of domestic perfection. And I was just the boring accountant's sister she tolerated because she needed a favor. "You look so tired, Eden," she cooed, pressing a heavy thermos with a yellow lid into my hands. "I made you my special herbal tea for stress. Promise me you'll drink it." Her intensity was unsettling, almost manic. Behind her, Jared was loading the last bag into the taxi. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He was sweating despite the air conditioning, looking like a man marching to the gallows rather than a tropical vacation. He mumbled a goodbye and fled outside. Brooke gave me one last squeeze, her perfume suffocatingly sweet. "Take care of Nola," she said, though she looked past me, checking her reflection in the mirror one last time. Then she was gone. The heavy oak door clicked shut, sealing out the noise of the departing taxi. The silence that rushed back in the hallway felt heavy. It wasn't peaceful. It was the pressurized silence of a deep ocean trench, waiting to crush whatever was foolish enough to stay. I turned around, plastering a cheerful smile on my face for my niece. Nola was standing by the stairs, clutching her iPad. For 5 years, that screen had been her voice. I expected her to tap an icon or type out a greeting for the robotic text to speech voice to read. I loved her, but communicating with her was often exhausting. A slow game of charades and digital interpretation. I took a breath, ready to ask if she wanted to bake cookies. But Nola didn't move. She didn't look at her screen. She looked at me with an intensity that belonged to a much older woman. Her knuckles were white around the device. Then, she opened her mouth. The sound that came out wasn't a grunt or a cry. It was a sentence. "Auntie, put the thermos down." The thermos felt suddenly hot in my hands, like a live grenade. My mute niece was speaking, and her eyes were filled with absolute terror. I stared at the child I thought I knew, and the world shifted beneath my feet. My fingers went numb, losing their grip on the yellow lid. I set the thermos on the granite counter with a sharp clatter that sounded too loud in the empty house. "Nola," I whispered, my voice trembling more than hers. She didn't look like a child playing a prank. She looked like a prisoner negotiating with a guard. She took a step closer, her eyes darting to the front door. "Mom put the bad powder in it," Nola explained, pointing a small finger at the thermos. "The kind that makes you sleep and get sick in the bathroom for days." I looked at the innocent, looking liquid sloshing inside. Brooke had pressed it into my hands with such concern, such overwhelming sisterly love. A wave of nausea hit me that had nothing to do with poison. "Why?" I asked, sinking to my knees so I was level with her. Why would she do that to me? I reached out to touch her shoulder, needing to verify she was real. "You've been silent since you were 3. The doctors said it was neurological." Nola shook her head violently. It wasn't sickness. It was a promise. She took a deep breath, like she was diving underwater. "Mommy said if I ever used my voice, she would hurt you. She said my words were dangerous. She said if I loved Auntie Eden, I had to keep my mouth shut forever." I remembered the bruises on Nola's arms when she was a toddler. Brooke had called them clumsy accidents, laughing off my concern. Now I saw the grip marks of a mother terrified of exposure. I was 3. Nola whispered, tears finally spilling over. I didn't want you to get hurt. So I stopped talking. My heart broke into jagged pieces. This child had sacrificed her childhood, her voice, her everything, just to protect me from a threat I didn't even know existed. Nola pulled back, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. We don't have time to cry, Auntie. They aren't on a cruise. She spoke with a frightening maturity. They are driving to Indianapolis. There is a lawyer there. The pieces started clicking together in my accountant brain. The trust fund. Our mother's estate was held in a complex trust that required both signatures for withdrawals. Unless one trustee was incapacitated or deemed mentally unfit. She's going to steal the money. I realized. How do you know all this? I asked, my voice barely audible. Nola looked at the floor, scuffing her shoe against the tile. Because I am invisible. Adults don't whisper when they think the kid is broken. She told me about phone calls she wasn't supposed to hear, and legal papers left on the counter. She had been gathering intelligence for years, a spy in her own home. Mommy practiced your signature a lot, she added softly. She practiced until it looked just like yours. I looked toward the hallway where Brooke's home office was located. It was always locked. A shrine to her privacy where no one was allowed to enter. We can't get in there, I said, feeling the defeat rising again. She keeps the key on her. Nola grabbed my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. It's a digital pad now, she said. I know the code. It's the day Grandma died. She pulled me toward the door. Come on, we have to get the papers. I dialed Gwen immediately. My hands shook as I pressed the phone to my ear, watching Nola stare at the locked office door. Gwen was an ER nurse and my college roommate. She wouldn't ask questions until she saw the evidence. I need you here. Bring a tox kit if you can steal one. I stammered into the receiver. She promised to be there in 20 minutes. I hung up and looked at Nola. Okay, I said. Show me. Nola punched in the numbers 1104. November 4th. The day our mother died. The lock beeped a cheerful acceptance that felt obscene given the context. We stepped inside. The room was cold. Conditioned to a chill that made the hair on my arms stand up. It smelled of toner and sanitized ambition. Nola didn't hesitate. She walked straight to the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet. The fake stories are in the blue folder, she said, pointing. The money papers are red. I opened the blue folder first. The label read, Eden Medical History. I didn't have a medical history file with Brooke. Inside were pages of handwritten notes in my sister's neat, looping script. Eden having episodes again. Paranoia increasing. Claims I am stealing from her. My breath hitched. She wasn't just stealing the money, she was building a narrative to discredit me. If I complained about the theft, this file would prove I was the crazy one. I grabbed the red folder next. My stomach churned as I thumbed through bank authorization forms. They were already signed. My signature stared back at me, perfect in every loop and slant, except for the capital E. I always hooked the top. This one was straight. It was a forgery good enough to fool a tired bank clerk, but not me. Behind them were printed emails from a Warren Ducker, Esquire, in Indianapolis. Not the Caribbean, Indianapolis. The doorbell rang, startling us both. I rushed to let Gwen in. She breezed past me, professional bag in hand, her face tight with worry. I pointed to the yellow thermos on the counter. Brooke insisted I drink it for stress, I said. Gwen uncapped it, sniffing the herbal steam. She dipped a test strip into the liquid, her movements precise and clinical. It smells like chamomile, she muttered, watching the strip change color. But chamomile doesn't turn litmus purple. Gwen studied the strip, her expression darkening. Benzodiazepines, she announced flatly. And a high concentration of laxatives. This isn't stress relief, Eden. This is a chemical lobotomy. She looked at me, horror dawning in her eyes. If you drank this, You'd be unconscious in an hour and shitting yourself for 3 days. You'd be in the hospital, completely incapacitated. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Brooke wanted me out of the way, helpless and humiliated, while she robbed me blind. Check Jared's Instagram. Gwen commanded, pulling out her own phone. He's too stupid to turn off location services. I opened the app, my fingers feeling thick and clumsy. There was a photo posted 10 minutes ago. A latte art heart with the caption vacation mode? But the geotag didn't say Jamaica. It said the Grind Coffee House, Indianapolis, Indiana. Nola looked at the screen and whispered the scariest thing yet. They aren't just stealing money, Auntie. They're erasing you? I stared at the phone, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. We need legal backup, Gwen said. Already dialing, she put it on speaker. Kevin was an old friend, now an assistant district attorney, and he listened to our frantic explanation without interrupting. When he finally spoke, his voice was ice cold. This is conspiracy to commit fraud and assault, he said. But if you confront her now, she runs with what she has. We need to catch her in the act. Kevin outlined a plan that made my stomach turn. We had to let Brooke walk into that bank meeting on Monday thinking she had won. You need to buy us time to coordinate with Indianapolis police, Kevin instructed. Make her believe the tea worked. If she suspects anything, she'll destroy the documents and claim it was a misunderstanding. I looked at the thermos. I had to become the helpless sister she expected. I had to lie to the liar. My fingers hovered over the screen. I typed out the words slowly, imagining the symptoms Gwen had described. Brooke. I feel awful. Dizzy. Can't stop throwing up. Think I need to lay down. I added a few typos for realism, the kind of mistakes a shaky hand would make. It felt dirty, using my own fear as a weapon, but I hit send. Then we waited. The three of us stood in the kitchen, staring at the phone, waiting for the monster to reply. The response came 2 minutes later. No phone call. No frantic demand to speak to her daughter. Just a text bubble. Oh no? That bug is going around. Don't worry about Nola, she's good at entertaining herself. Just rest and drink plenty of water. Heart emoji. The heart emoji felt like a slap in the face. She wasn't worried about me dying. She was relieved I was out of the way. She didn't even ask if you called a doctor. Gwen whispered, disgusted. Kevin called back 10 minutes later. I am sending a child advocacy specialist to take a statement, he said. We need Nola on record tonight. The mood in the kitchen shifted from panic to grim determination. This was the point of no return. Once Nola spoke to an official, there was no going back to being a family. I looked at my niece. She looked small in her oversized t-shirt, but her jaw was set. I am ready, she said. I want to tell. The specialist arrived with a camera and a gentle demeanor that couldn't mask the gravity of the situation. We sat in the living room, the red recording light blinking like a warning eye. Nola sat on the edge of the sofa, her feet barely touching the rug. She recounted everything: the threats, the bruises, the years of enforced silence. Hearing it out loud, in that clear, steady voice, made the air feel thin. It wasn't just a story anymore. It was evidence. When the camera turned off, Nola didn't slump. She looked taller. Did I do good? She asked, looking at me with wide, hopeful eyes. You did perfectly. I promised. Squeezing her hand. Kevin texted again. Indianapolis PD is briefed. The sting is set for Monday at 9 a.m. We had 48 hours to kill. I looked at the phone. Then at the poison tea. We had to keep playing dead while Brooke walked straight into the grave she dug for herself. Sunday dragged like a funeral procession. We camped in the living room, surrounded by laptop screens and half-eaten pizza, transforming Brooke's pristine sanctuary into a command center. I sent sporadic texts to keep the ruse alive, complaining of dehydration and exhaustion. Every time my phone buzzed with Brooke's chirpy, dismissive replies, My anger sharpened into something cold and useful. Gwen monitored the tech setup, while Nola drew pictures of dragons burning down castles. We were soldiers waiting for dawn, dreading the battle but desperate for the end. Monday morning brought a gray, oppressive sky and a secure link from Kevin. We gathered around the largest monitor, watching a grainy feed from a hidden camera in the Indianapolis law firm. The timestamp in the corner ticked away the seconds until 9 o'clock. My stomach churned, but not from poison. It was the anticipation of seeing my sister's face when she walked into the trap. "Are they there yet?" Nola asked, squeezing my hand until her knuckles turned white. "Almost," I whispered. At 9:02, the lobby doors swung open. Brooke entered first, looking every inch the grieving, burdened sister she pretended to be. She wore a modest navy dress and low heels, a costume designed to scream responsibility. She carried the leather portfolio that held the forged future she was trying to steal. Behind her, Jared trailed like a ghost. He looked pale, his eyes darting toward the exit signs as if calculating escape routes. He knew this was wrong. He was just too weak to stop it. Watching her confident stride, I realized something that made me almost laugh. Brooke thought she was a genius because she could manipulate people. But she was terrible at math. I had spent the night reviewing the copies of the trust documents Nola found. Brooke had miscalculated the tax implications of a lump sum withdrawal. She would have triggered an audit within weeks, even without my intervention. My boring obsession with spreadsheets was the one thing she hadn't accounted for. Her greed had made her sloppy, and numbers never lie. In the lobby, Jared suddenly stopped. He grabbed Brooke's elbow, pulling her to a halt just feet from the receptionist's desk. The microphone picked up his frantic whisper, distorted but audible. "Brooke, we can't. What if she's not sick? What if she calls the bank?" His fear was palpable, a vibrating frequency of panic. For a second, I thought he might actually have a spine. I held my breath, wondering if the whole sting would collapse right there in the hallway before they even signed a paper. Brooke didn't flinch. She turned on him with a snake, like speed, her face twisting from concern to viciousness. She hissed something low and sharp, jabbing a manicured finger into his chest. "Get it together," she snapped, her voice clear enough for the mic to catch. "She's lying in her own filth right now. We are doing this. Don't you dare ruin my life." It wasn't a partnership, it was a hostage situation. Jared slumped, defeated by the sheer force of her malice. She fixed his collar, smoothing the fabric with a chilling tenderness, then turned back to the receptionist with a dazzling smile. "We're here to see Mr. Ducker," she announced. The receptionist, who had been briefed by the detectives, nodded and buzzed them through the heavy wooden doors. They walked down the hallway toward the conference room, footsteps echoing on the marble. Nola leaned forward, her eyes wide and dark. "She thinks she won," Nola whispered. "She doesn't know the door only locks from the outside." Inside the conference room, the air was thick with impending doom, though only half the people there could smell it. Warren Ducker sat at the head of the mahogany table, looking grim. Flanking him were two individuals introduced as senior partners, though their cheap suits and watchful eyes screamed law enforcement. Brooke swept in, placing her portfolio on the table, with the confidence of a queen claiming her tribute. She didn't notice that Ducker didn't stand to shake her hand. She just smiled, assuming the world was hers to take. "Thank you for accommodating us on such short notice," Brooke began, her voice dripping with that fake sweetness I loathed. She opened her leather folder, sliding the forged forms across the polished wood. "My sister's condition has deteriorated rapidly, and we must secure her assets for her care." Beside me, Nola stiffened, hearing her mother lie with such practiced ease. On screen, Jared stared at his hands, sweating through his shirt. He looked like he was about to vomit on the expensive carpet, unable to look anyone in the eye. The woman on Ducker's right, Detective Morrison, reached out and picked up the papers. She didn't look at them, she looked at Brooke. "We have a slight problem with the verification, Mrs. Whitford," she said, her tone conversational but sharp. She placed a second document on the table next to the forgeries. It was a verified affidavit I had digitally signed an hour ago. The signatures don't match. In fact, the slope of the E suggests two completely different authors. Brooke's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Brooke recovered instantly, pulling the victim card from her sleeve. "Oh, that," she sighed, shaking her head sadly. "Eden's handwriting has been erratic lately. It's part of her neurological decline." She reached into her bag and pulled out the blue folder. The fake medical file Nola and I had found. I have documentation here from her psychiatrist detailing her instability and paranoid episodes. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. Watching her use my alleged insanity as a weapon was a violation I hadn't prepared for. Detective Morrison didn't even glance at the blue folder. "That's interesting," she said, leaning forward. "Because we spoke to Eden's employer this morning. They describe her as their most reliable senior accountant. We also contacted her primary care physician, who confirmed she has a clean bill of health and no history of psychosis." The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. Brooke blinked, her processing speed lagging behind the reality of the situation. Her narrative was hitting a wall of facts, and she didn't have a backup script. The male detective, Officer Miller, spoke up for the first time. "We also analyzed the tea you left for your sister." He placed a lab report on the table, the red stamp visible even on the grainy video feed. It contained dangerous levels of sedatives, enough to put her in a coma. Brooke's face went pale, the blood draining away to leave her looking like a wax statue. She opened her mouth to speak, to deny, to spin another lie, but the air seemed to leave the room. "This is ridiculous," Brooke finally stammered, her voice rising in pitch. "You are interrogating me." "I am trying to help my family." Morrison ignored the outburst and pulled a tablet from her briefcase. "We have one more witness statement to review." She tapped the screen and turned the volume up. Nola's voice, clear and brave. "I've filled the conference room in Indianapolis and our living room in Ohio. Mommy said if I ever spoke again, she would hurt Auntie Eden." It was the sound of a ghost coming back to life. Brooke recoiled as if she'd been slapped. She stared at the tablet, her eyes bulging. That's not possible." She whispered, the denial ripping out of her throat. "She's mute. She's been mute since she was 3. She looked around the room, desperate for someone to agree with her reality. "This is a deep fake. You fabricated this?" In her panic, she admitted the truth. She believed her daughter was voiceless because she had made her that way. Her own shock was the final nail in her coffin. Then the survival instinct kicked in, ugly and desperate. Brooke turned on her husband with the ferocity of a cornered animal. "He made me do it," she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Jared. "He has gambling debts. He threatened me. I didn't want to hurt anyone." Jared looked up, tears streaming down his face, but he didn't argue. He just shook his head. Officer Miller stood up, the metallic jingle of handcuffs cutting through her screaming. "Brooke Whitford, you are under arrest for fraud and attempted assault." As the officers hauled my screaming sister out of the room, Kevin's voice came through our phone line. "We have them, Eden. Do you want to proceed with the federal filing?" I looked at Nola. She was crying, not out of fear, but relief. The monster was in a cage. The woman who had stolen my confidence and my niece's voice was gone. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of 5 years lift off my shoulders. "Yes," I said firmly. "Charge her with everything." The video feed cut to black, but the image of Brooke thrashing against the handcuffs burned into my retinas. She had screamed names at us, profanities that curdled the blood, blaming an 8-year-old for ruining her perfect life. It was the tantrum of a narcissist denied her reflection. Beside me, Nola didn't flinch. She had watched her mother disappear on the screen with the detached curiosity of a scientist, observing a volatile chemical reaction. The monster was finally gone, taken away by men in cheap suits. I closed the laptop, severing the digital link to Indianapolis. The silence that followed was different from the suffocating quiet Brooke had enforced. It was the hollow, echoing silence of a house that had lost its dictator. I looked around the pristine living room, seeing it for what it truly was, a stage set for a play that had been cancelled. The lavender smell was fading, replaced by the stale scent of cooling pizza and anxiety. We were alone, but for the first time, we were safe. The next few hours were a blur of official phone calls and flashing lights. Kevin arrived to manage the local police, ensuring Nola wasn't whisked away into the foster system. I packed a bag for her, grabbing the few things that seemed to matter: her dinosaur encyclopedia, her worn sneakers, and the drawing of the dragon. We walked out of that house without looking back. I locked the front door, leaving the Mother of the Year plaque hanging in the hallway to gather dust in the dark. 2 weeks later, the Franklin County Family Court felt less like a place of justice and more like a waiting room for purgatory. The fluorescent lights hummed a low, headache-inducing note. I sat at the plaintiff's table, smoothing the skirt of my best suit, my hands trembling. Even with the evidence, even with the arrest, the fear lingered. Brooke still had money, or at least access to lawyers who could twist reality. I was just the aunt with a small apartment and a boring job. Jared wasn't there. His lawyer had submitted a statement surrendering parental rights in exchange for leniency on the fraud charges. He had chosen self-preservation over his daughter one last time. The judge, a stern woman with reading glasses perched on her nose, flipped through the thick case file. Every page turn sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. She read the police reports, the toxicology results, and the transcript of Nola's interview. Her face remained impassive, betraying nothing of her internal verdict. Finally, the judge looked down from the bench. She didn't look at the expensive lawyers or the court stenographer. She looked directly at Nola. My niece sat beside me, her feet dangling off the heavy wooden chair. She was wearing a purple dress she had picked out herself, a small splash of color in the gray room. Nola, the judge said softly, her voice losing its judicial edge. I understand you have something you want to tell the court today. You don't have to be afraid. Nola shifted in her seat, the wood creaking loudly. For a moment, the old terror seemed to grip her. She looked at the door, perhaps expecting Brooke to burst in and punish her for speaking. I held my breath, wondering if the words would get stuck in her throat. Then she looked at me. I squeezed her hand, offering the only anchor I had. She took a deep breath, her small chest expanding, and turned back to the judge. The courtroom held its collective breath. I don't want to live with strangers, Nola said, her voice small but steady. The court reporter's fingers flew across the keypad. I want to live with Auntie Eden. The judge nodded, encouraging her to continue. Nola looked down at our joined hands. Mommy told me to be quiet so I wouldn't hurt people. But Auntie Eden never asked me to be quiet. She just sat with me. She looked up, her eyes fierce. She listens to me even when I don't use any words. I felt a tear slide down my cheek, hot and fast. I had spent my whole life feeling invisible, the background character in Brooke's dazzling show. I thought my quietness was a flaw, a lack of charisma. But to Nola, my silence hadn't been an absence, it had been a space for her to exist without pressure. The judge took off her glasses and set them on the bench. The court finds that it is in the best interest of the child to grant full custody. The gavel came down with a sound of finality that rang in my bones. Emergency custody was granted, with a permanent hearing set for 6 months out, but we all knew it was a formality. We walked out of the courthouse into the blinding afternoon sun. The air tasted different out here. Cleaner, lighter. Nola didn't let go of my hand. She skipped a little step, looking up at me with a grin that was missing a tooth. "Can we get pancakes now?" she asked. 6 months later. Silence was a stranger in our apartment. The quiet that once suffocated Nola had been replaced by a constant, joyful noise. She narrated everything. From the way her cereal crunched to the complex geopolitical struggles of her stuffed animals. My small living room, once a sanctuary for my solitary life, was now a chaotic museum of childhood. Drawings of dragons covered the fridge, and plastic dinosaurs staged elaborate battles on the rug. It was messy, loud, and absolutely perfect. Nola wasn't just surviving the aftermath, she was finally inhaling the world. She sat at the kitchen table, constructing a fortress out of frozen waffles and maple syrup. "The syrup is the moat, Auntie Eden," she explained seriously, placing a blueberry on the battlements. "Because sticky enemies are slow enemies." I watched her, marveling at the imagination that had been locked away in a dark room for 5 years. There were still bad nights, of course. Sometimes she woke up screaming, checking to see if her voice still worked. But those shadows were retreating, chased away by the sunlight of ordinary days. Watching her play, I thought about the lie I had told myself for decades. I had believed I was the boring sister, the unlovable accountant who disappeared in a crowd. Brooke was the sun, burning bright and destructive, and I was just a dull rock orbiting her. But I realized now that rocks are what you build foundations on. My stability hadn't been a defect, it was the very thing that saved us. I wasn't invisible. I was the shield that held the line when the monsters came home. A memory of my mother surfaced, sharp and sudden. Years ago, shortly before she died, she had pulled me aside at a family dinner, watching Brooke preen for guests. "Your sister shines," Mom had whispered, her grip tight on my arm. "But you, Eden. You see." I hadn't understood her then, thinking it was a consolation prize for the plain daughter. Now I knew better. Mom had sensed the rot in Brooke's heart long before I did. She had left the trust requiring 2 signatures, because she knew I would eventually look closer. Nola abandoned her sticky fortress and looked up at me, her face smeared with syrup. The playful chatter stopped, replaced by that old, sulfur intensity she sometimes slipped back into. "Auntie," she asked, wiping her hands on a napkin. "Do you know why I talked to you that day?" I shook my head, my throat tight. "Because you were the only one who didn't look through me," she said simply. "Everyone else saw a broken doll. You just saw Nola. You actually waited for me. It was the only validation I would ever need." I pulled her into a hug, not caring about the sticky syrup on her cheek. We were a jagged little family, pieced together from the wreckage of my sister's ambition, but we were solid. I looked at the teapot on the stove, whistling its ready note. It wasn't poison anymore, it was just tea. "Tell me more about the Blueberry Guard," I said, pouring 2 mugs. Nola grinned, taking a deep breath to launch into another story. I sat back and listened, letting the beautiful, chaotic sound of her voice fill the room.